Hello, I'm Bob Mayer and welcome to my video channel. This one is about great disasters, and today we're going to talk about the Donner Party. Most people know some few things about the Donner Party, but there's some intriguing parts to it that when you research it will surprise you. I'm going to cover the 6 cascade events that lead to the final disaster of the Donner Party. There's a quote from one of the survivors. Every catastrophe has 7 events. This is something I've researched. I call them 6 cascade events leading to the final event, the catastrophe. The cascade events by themselves sometimes are no big deal, and one of them always involves human error. So therefore, disasters can be inverted, and that's why we study them. That's why I wrote this book. The basic the facts: spring 1846, a bunch of immigrants departed west for California. This was very early, one of the first wagon trains going west. They decided to take a cutoff, shorter route, the Hastings cutoff. That delay from taking that route delayed them getting through the Sierra Nevadas. They got stuck by snow, and disaster ensued. Here's the timeline. In 1846, they set out from Missouri. 12 May, they hit Fort Laramie. They're urged not to take the cutoff. They don't listen. They cross the Continental Divide. The Little Sandy River was when they had to make the final decision to go on the normal route. They choose to take the cutoff going towards Fort Bridger. They depart Fort Bridger to take the cutoff. They cross the Wasatch Mountains of Utah with a lot of delays. They set off across the Great Salt Lake Desert. If you've ever driven west from Salt Lake City, you know what that's like. And way too late in the season, 26th of September, they finally rejoined the California Trail at the Humboldt River. And 7 October, disaster begins. I'm going to talk about these specific events in the Cascades. On murder, one of the men stays behind. A relief party arrives with 2 Native American guides. But by November, they can't make it over Truckee Pass, and they decide to camp for the winter. The first member of the party dies from malnutrition on 15 December, but they were not the first person to die. We'll talk about that. They pick the strongest members. They call it the Forlorn Hope. That's a military term for those people who charge the gate of a fortification. They make it over the pass, but the snow's too much for them to continue. They draw lots to decide who to kill and eat, but they can't do it. But eventually they begin to die, so they've got food anyway. They run out of dead meat from the dead, and they decide to kill the 2 Native Americans. They chase after them. Then they eventually track them down, kill them, and eat them. And then they're actually taken in by a Native American village. 19 February, the first relief party makes it, and 29 April. That's a long time. Think about that. January, February, March into April. 4 months. The last surviving members rescued. So what caused all these problems? Well, first off, most Americans don't remember this, but the Mexican War was going on. California was not the United States. They were emigrating to Mexico, technically speaking. Okay, so this caused problems later on in that the people who could have rescued them are all fighting, okay? So anytime you make a decision, look at the big picture. Is that going to affect what you're doing? They chose an unknown, untried path. It's called taking a shortcut. We've all heard why that's bad. This guy, Lansford Hastings, in 1842, wrote a book called The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. In one sentence, he mentions a new path to the west. We said we're shorter and faster. Technically on the map it is. If we look at this, the Hastings cutoff is that little gray spot that goes below the Great Salt Lake through the Wasatch and down below instead of looping north and around. You either went up north to the Oregon Trail or south. Notice all the California ones cross the Sierras in the same place. That was just stupid. Hastings had never even traveled it when he wrote it in that book, okay? You know, someone in the party, James Reed, read it and noted the mention of the cutoff, and they decided to take it. I actually got the book and read it, and it's just one sentence, okay? Inability to make sound decisions on their own. After Fort Laramie, there was still time before they had to make a decision, but they got a letter from Hastings. He was sending letters, people heading east, to hand to immigrants. He warned of opposition by Mexican authorities in California. He also claimed out to work a new and better route and would be working at Fort Bridger to guide Party West. Unfortunately, he wasn't there when they arrived. Fort Bridger was off the known path to California. Some speculate Hastings was in cahoots with Bridger to get customers to go through his fort. They reached the Little Sandy River when to make a decision. Most of the people with them took the traditional route. They decided to take the cutoff. Lack of clear leadership. Reed was a former military officer, and he initially commanded the party, but he was too hardcore, so they voted him out, and they voted in Donner, who was a lot less forceful. In life and death situations, you really don't want to put things to a vote, but that's what they did a lot of times. They put things to a vote. They kept taking votes all along the course, and the votes were bad. You need a leader in life and death situations. Lewis and Clark took votes sometimes, but ultimately, first off, they were all military men in the party, and ultimately, though, Lewis and Clark made the decision. They had to cross the Wasatch, the Great Salt Lake Desert, and Pilot's Peak. I was in the Wasatch in February on winter warfare training. I don't know how they got wagons through that thing. Then they hit the Great Salt Lake Desert in 1986. A group in four-wheel drive vehicles couldn't cross the same path the Donners attempted. Once they got around the Great Salt Lake, they were low on water and food, and they were tired, so they went up to Pilot's Peak. If you drive the interstate out of Great Salt Lake, out of Salt Lake City, west, you see Pilot's Peak way off to the north. A fight broke out between two members, and one was killed, and the other was banished, except the guy they banished was the most forceful and experienced man in the party. So, that's not good. Do you see how it's starting to pile up, all the bad things? They weren't willing to accept the reality of the situation once they got across the Great Salt Lake, and they were way behind in the season. They tried to push through the mountains, even though there was a possibility a blizzard could stop them. The tipping point. I always look for a tipping point in disasters, and sometimes it's a really small thing. It's a no-do-over event, which is death is a new do-over event. On 7 October 1846, as they came up to the Sierra Nevadas along the Humboldt River, everybody was exhausted. The animals were tired, so everyone had to get off the wagons and walk. There was an old man, Hardcoop, who couldn't walk, and he kept asking people if he could get in their wagon, and no one allowed him in. He sat down, and they left him behind. When they made that decision, it was everyone for themselves. Okay, they were no longer a cohesive group. They had no leadership. Recognizing a tipping point is hard to do sometimes, but it's critical. Every disaster has one, okay? You know, they could have, so many places when you look back in retrospect, they could have changed their fate. Yeah, the inability to make those earlier decisions led to decisions nobody wants to have to make. They had murders, they had cannibalism, human error. This entire thing was human error. 1,000 feet from the summit of Truckee Pass, it began to snow. They couldn't make it. 5 feet of snow. I've moved in snow that deep. It's extraordinarily difficult, especially if you're not prepared. They decided to camp for the winter, even though they didn't have enough supplies. They were hoping a rescue party would get them. However, they weren't taking into account the Mexican War. Most of the people would have been the rescue party were off at war. Yeah, they'd sealed their fate way long before. Here's an interesting point, though. The year before, a boy almost, was trapped in the same place the previous winter. He survived because he did a lot of fishing in the lake. No one in the Donner Party even attempted to fish. Here's a link to my all the gear, free apps, websites I have. You hit that red box on my website, it pops up the QR code to my website. My survival books. And this is my background. Don't be the Donner Party. Think about things. Think about making decisions. Look ahead. Look for tipping points. Stay safe out there, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel.